There are 4 professional techniques that you could use in order to draw and study every human body you want. If you don't use them, your drawing could become either stiff, flat, or unproportional. And yes, if these are the problems that you have, then I have the perfect exercise for you. Hi guys, my name's Marcel, and it is okay if you spell my name wrong. I can live with Michael or Marshall. However, I do draw the line at microphallus. For the love of Christ, don't Google that. Today's exercise is used by a lot of pros that specialize in gesture and life drawing. Because if you use these 4 tools or techniques, you will see how the bodies you draw get more and more 3D, and you will be able to draw bodies a lot more believable like that. So if you have any of these problems with your bodies looking stiff, flat, or just flat out unproportional, you should practice today's exercise as much as you can in order to get rid of these bad habits. And you do not need any knowledge in anatomy. Today's lesson is completely about proportions. And you can start right now. Everything that you need is just some random pen and obviously something to draw on. And then you can get drawing like I said. So, straight to the point. These are the 4 tools that most pros use when studying a body from a reference. There are plumb and level lines, which are guidelines that are being used, negative spaces, angles, and shape design. And the first 3 of these techniques are just to get the proportions right, because it doesn't matter how good you are at drawing, it just looks bad when your proportions suck. Yes, it's that important. Now, just to explain what this means, number 1, these are just 2 kinds of guidelines. These plumb and level lines are just horizontal and vertical lines that pros use in order to measure proportions. They are just named like that because back in the day, before rulers were invented, the old masters literally used a plumb weight on a string to measure proportions in their art. Now there's negative space, which, yeah, I can explain this in like one easy example. You know that feeling when you try to draw a body and you're like, I'm not quite sure if the arm is too long or the torso is too short, and instead of just checking every part of the human body individually, pros just take a look at the empty space between these limbs and check the shape of that instead. This is way more efficient than checking the arm, the torso, and the hand individually, so it's really helpful when you're stuck somewhere. Technique number 3 are angles, and that's probably the hardest one. It's about estimating how the limbs are angled and trying to draw the same angle in your drawing. That's gonna be really tricky, but do not worry, that's why we will be practicing this together in this video. And yes, I hear you wanna be able to draw bodies from humans without any references, but don't worry. If you use these tools to study humans like this, you will get better at proportions, and then you might be able to draw completely without references at some point. Just be aware that even if you don't believe it at first, all the pros in every genre, even animations, comics, and manga do use references, like a lot. They almost never draw without them. Okay, so these 3 techniques are about drawing the rough silhouette and shape of your reference. But there is this one last tool to finish it off, and that's shape design. Shape design is about taking a shape and manipulating it to your liking. So you have your rough skeleton stickman drawn out with correct proportions, but now you need to be able to bend these shapes in order to look like they do on your reference. Shape design is the key to draw basically anything, and if you are good at manipulating these shapes, this will be the key to draw humans, objects, even Pokemon, basically anything. You just need to analyze your reference and then try to give your object the same volume. Again, don't worry, we will be practicing this together because, as you might have seen, this can get very challenging. So, because you want your drawing to look like this and not like that, we will do a little skill check. Okay, so this should be common sense, but if you cannot draw this, then you obviously can't draw that. Makes sense, right? So, first up, try the basics. A simple cylinder in perspective. That should be easy enough. And also, don't forget to split the finished thing into even halves, just to check if it has the correct volume. Now, the second skill check would be to stack 2 blocks on top of each other. Also, should not be much of a problem, and again, you should split the finished figure into even halves. Now, check for this. Check your CSI lines. Are the curves in your artwork actually round? Are the strokes nice and straight? Do your objects look like this, or more like that? Gotta be honest with yourself here, you really need to get these down perfectly. Because think of the example from before. If you are still struggling here, I do have exercises about that. I have one that's really easy and basic, and the other one that's a bit more advanced. So don't worry, the whole topic is hard. There are plenty of people that were surprised about how tricky even the basics can be. So don't beat yourself up over it. Okay, usually studying a body consists of 2 steps. Capturing the gesture and then adding volume. Now, here are some quick tips before we start. First, draw big. Use your whole page. Pros usually draw on giant boards, so using your whole page is the bare minimum here. Be exact. You'll see how I'm correcting lines that are just millimeters off because it's that important. You can and should be very strict here when it comes to proportion. Also, take your time. It mostly takes like 30 or 40 minutes until you get something like this done, so pause while drawing. Don't try to keep up with me. Measuring like this takes time, and that's not unusual. And lastly, this exercise is hard. I also screw up from time to time, and I was used to drawing like this, so it may very well be that it can take several hours until you get the hang out of this exercise. Alright, you ready? Then let's go. Now, I couldn't decide for a reference image, so I just thought I would take a very casual photo of myself. What? The first thing you always do here is to set markings from head to toe. Where's the head of your drawing and where's the drawing gonna end? Like I said, I've done this a lot by now, so I think I can tell where the middle is, but it's always better to just measure things by hand. So I'm just measuring this with my pencil, and yeah, I'm actually off by a couple of millimeters. So let's just correct that. Don't forget, you mainly do this exercise to get better with your proportions. So this will be our main task for the next half hour or so. Trying to estimate and measure distances as best as we can. Let's do the same thing for our reference image. So I take out my pencil and I just want to see where the halfway point is. So the halfway point should be right around where his thigh is, so that's really valuable information. Let's keep that in mind. Now what I like to do here is to look out for landmarks, like the belly button, and then just draw it in. Just, you know, as a point of reference. Now, you know how artists always measure a human body in heads? We'll be doing the exact same thing, so let's just find out where the head is. So I take my pencil and I try to measure exactly that. Now, as you can see, the head fits in the upper body like round about 2.5 times. So the head should be a bit bigger than 1/3 of the upper half. I admit that's not a perfect measurement, but you gotta work with what you have. In this case, I just make sure my head is round about 2.5 times the upper part. So I'm just checking, does the head fit in there 2.5 times? And it actually does. And now you have the most important part of the image, the head. I cannot stress enough how important that is. Like I said, I also screw up from time to time, like in this example where I wasn't careful with the head measurements and my model became like an orangutan. So yeah, please be careful, especially in these early stages. You can screw up monumentally here if you measure something wrong. So yeah, the head is the most important thing by far. I also like to add things like the ears, basically anything that could help me to get some orientation. Now, if you look closely, the ear is on the same height as the shoulder. Now, that's easy enough. So let's use a level line, measure it out, and draw it in. Now you might remember we're still at step number 1. Capturing the gesture. So I only limit myself to CSI lines here, just strokes and curves. Let's try this with the back and really try capturing the dynamics here. Now, just to make sure and just to check, I'm using another plumb guideline to see where this arch ends. In the original, it ends right where the head is. Also, in case you're now like, oh wow, what's that eraser pen looking thingy, or you just want to know more about my art supplies, I do have an art supply list with all of my stuff in case you want to read into that. Okay, no, but what about the arm? How do we measure or scale this? Isn't this gonna be like an absolute pain? Well, remember our tools. Let's use the negative space technique. Let's just focus on the shape of this empty space, and all of this is now going to be a lot easier to draw. And now you can roughly complete the arm with some dynamic lines. Remember, no details, it's just about the gesture and placement. Speaking of, if you also draw along with me, please always keep your eyes on the reference image when copying. I'm also just a guy, I make mistakes, as you've seen before. It's always better to keep your eyes on the original when you draw something yourself. Now, in order to understand this pose better, I'm adding an oval for the ribcage here. After all, this is a study of a human pose and proportions, so trying to get an understanding of this is basically the whole point of this exercise. Alright, let's do the second arm. I just block in where the hand goes, and you guessed it, we are again going to use negative space that we can block in. That's going to be a lot easier than trying to figure out where the arm goes. Okay, there's one last measuring technique that we did not use yet, and that's angles. I'll show you how it's done. I'm gonna measure the knee, which would be roundabout on the height of the shoulder. And next up, I'll try to copy the angle of the leg as best as I can. I think this is the hardest technique out of all of them, but sometimes this is just necessary in order to measure things correctly. Okay, I think at this point you've got the idea, you've seen all three measurement techniques in action, so I'll just fast forward through the rest of this process. Just don't forget to limit yourself to CSI lines and keep your lines simple. It's just about the silhouette for now. Also, if you want to draw along here without me fast forwarding, I did upload the whole process of this drawing in real time. No narration, no skipping. And I'll gladly give you that video, but it would be really nice if you left a like in exchange. That way this video gets pushed to more artists and more people get to see this video. I would really appreciate it. Thanks. Now, the real-time video process of this drawing is down in the info box. Just click the link and you'll get there. Okay, we are done with blocking in the silhouette. Now you have the final chance to check if your drawing has the correct proportions. That's why we only used basic CSI lines, because changing things is still very simple and very quick. You don't need to erase a lot. Right now I'm checking random things like negative spaces, and if they all have similar shapes as they do on the reference. Or you could also check basic proportions, like is the foot roundabout as big as the head? And yeah, that also seems to check out. You can be really thorough here, like I noticed that I've forgotten about this little thing between his legs and not what you think. Yeah, this tiny negative space between his legs is still missing. So I'm just going to quickly add that. But all in all, I think the silhouette is really true to the original. And that's what it's all about when it comes to drawing proportions. Okay, now let's give this body some structure and volume. Let's start with the obvious part, like his arms. His biceps a bit bigger, so this is a nice example. This is where our last tool, shape design, comes into play. You're now manipulating the volume on his arm to make it bigger. And by circling around it like that, you can measure if it actually is gotten bigger in volume. So let's do the same thing on the forearm again. That one's very obvious, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And yeah, now you know why we did that whole shape design warm-up in the beginning. It's the exact same thing, just a bit more tricky. And that is basically all that's left to do here. Manipulating the form and then measuring how big it is by splitting it in even halves. I hope you guys don't mind me fast forwarding this, but if you want to draw along, there is a real-time process video you could watch instead. Also, I did upload another session with another model on my Patreon if you want to check that out, and also you could check out my sketchbook. It's got really nice and thick paper and it barely contains any wood fiber, so the pages don't get yellow over time. The last couple of copies are available in my online shop in case you're still looking for one. See you guys next time.